On July 15, 1976, in the dusty farming town of Chowchilla, California, something happened that should have been impossible. It started like any other summer afternoon. The sun burned down on two-lane roads, the orchards buzzed with heat, and a yellow school bus carried 26 children home from summer school. But by sunset, the bus had vanished, and so had every child on board. The driver's name was Frank Edward Ray. Everyone just called him Ed. 55 years old, soft-spoken, kind-eyed. A man who knew every gravel road in Madera County by heart. He'd been driving that route for years. It was a routine day, nothing unusual. Until the bus pulled onto Avenue 21 and met a roadblock. Three men stood in the path, faces covered with pantyhose, each holding a gun. They forced the bus to stop. Ed tried to reason with them. He even stepped out to protect the kids, but it was a trap calculated, timed, and terrifying. The men climbed aboard, waving weapons, shouting orders. The children, ranging from 5 to 14 years old, were too stunned to scream. They were ordered off the bus and into two white vans hidden nearby under trees and brush. The men had buried the bus under branches and left it behind. Then, they drove away. It took hours before anyone noticed the children were missing. One parent called the school, no answer. Another called a neighbor, nothing. A few called the police. By 8 p.m., the sun had dipped below the fields, and panic was spreading like wildfire. The parents gathered at the police station. The sheriff called the FBI. Search teams spread out on foot and in helicopters. But there was no sign of the bus, no tire tracks, no notes. Nothing. It was as if the ground had swallowed them whole. Meanwhile, inside those unmarked vans, the children were stuffed like cargo, scared, sweating, crying. The windows were blacked out. There was almost no air. The ride lasted 11 hours. 11 hours of uncertainty, darkness, fear. When the vans finally stopped, it was morning, but it didn't feel like morning. Because what they were looking at wasn't a hideout, it was a hole in the ground. At a quarry near Livermore, 100 miles from where they'd been taken, the vans pulled up to a site far from the main road. Inside that pit was a moving van buried in the earth, with only a wooden opening visible. It had been retrofitted with mattresses, a few jugs of water, food, and crude ventilation pipes. The kidnappers forced the children and Ed inside the buried container, 27 people in total. Then, they closed the wooden roof, covered it with a heavy metal plate, threw dirt on top, and left. Inside that underground prison, it was hot and foul. The air was thin. Some kids vomited, some screamed. One of the youngest whispered, "Are we going to die down here?" Ed didn't have an answer. He told them to stay calm, to sit close, to breathe slowly. But in the back of his mind, he wondered the same thing. In Chowchilla, the search had turned into a media circus. Reporters from every major network arrived. Hundreds of volunteers combed roads and fields. Police dogs sniffed empty ditches. Still no ransom call, no demands, no leads. The bus was eventually found, hidden in a dry creek bed, covered with brush. The wallets and purses of the children were still inside. But the children were gone, and that only deepened the horror. Back in the buried van, hours dragged on. The children were hungry, dehydrated, and terrified. The ventilation was failing. One child passed out, and Ed Ray knew. They couldn't wait anymore. He gathered the older boys. They began stacking the mattresses under the wooden ceiling. With their combined weight, they pushed upward. The roof didn't budge, so they pushed again and again, until something cracked. Slowly, they forced open a corner of the roof. They dug their hands into the dirt above, dug until their fingers bled. After what felt like hours, they broke through to sunlight. The first gasp of real air in 16 hours hit their lungs. One by one, they crawled out of the grave, bloody, bruised, but alive. All 27 of them, alive. They walked toward the quarry buildings, clothes torn, faces filthy. The workers who found them thought they were hallucinating, but within hours, the story exploded. Headlines read, 27 children escaped mass kidnapping. Buried alive and survived. Cameras surrounded the families. Reporters fought for interviews. And Ed Ray, humble as ever, just said, "We got out. That's what matters. But even then, the question remained, who would do this? It didn't take long. Less than 2 weeks later, investigators got a tip about a man named Frederick Newhall Woods IV. His family owned the quarry where the children were found. Woods was 24 years old, rich, privileged, and extremely secretive. Soon after, two brothers were arrested with him, James and Richard Schoenfeld. All in their early 20s, all from wealthy families, all obsessed with money. Their plan: kidnap a busload of children. Demand a $5 million ransom from the state, but they never made the call. Because the phone lines were jammed with news calls and parents. Their plan fell apart, so they panicked and fled. They were arrested within weeks, tried, convicted. All three were sentenced to life in prison. But justice didn't heal the trauma.
The children struggled for years. Nightmares, panic attacks, fear of dark spaces, fear of cars, fear of sleep. One girl slept with the lights on for 30 years. One boy grew up to become a truck driver, just to prove to himself that he could stay calm behind the wheel. Another couldn't speak about that day until he was nearly 40. Ed Ray received honors from the president. He quietly returned to life in Chowchilla. He passed away in 2012, never once seeking the spotlight. His courage helped 26 children survive a waking nightmare, but he rarely talked about it. Some wounds are too deep to reopen. The bus, old and rusted, was eventually placed in a museum, a silent reminder of what happened that day.